The city glowed with the golden reflection of the setting sun, casting long streaks of amber across the glass walls of the Mirabella, one of the most luxurious restaurants in the country. It was a place where the wealthy came to impress, where diplomats sealed deals over rare wine, and where perfection was not requested, it was demanded. Inside, the air smelled of imported flowers, freshly polished marble, and roasted truffle butter. Every table gleamed beneath chandeliers made of hand-cut crystal. Waiters in black vests moved silently, like shadows performing a ritual of elegance. And somewhere at the far end of the hall, behind a wooden door labeled "Staff Only," a woman was mopping the floor. Her name was Elena Morera. She was 45, her uniform faded, and her shoes worn from years of hard work. Her hands were rough, her back slightly bent, but her eyes carried a light no one cared to see. Every evening, Elena arrived before sunset and left long after midnight, unseen and unappreciated, blending into the background like the quiet hum of the kitchen machinery. She had learned to move without drawing attention, to bow slightly when the chefs barked, to nod politely when the managers ignored her greetings. The only one who ever seemed to notice her was Mr. Richard Halloway, the millionaire owner of the Mirabella chain, a man who believed that success gave him the right to look down on others. Richard was tall, impeccably dressed, and always carried an air of superiority wherever he went. He didn't just walk into a room, he owned it. To him, people were chess pieces on his board of ambition, useful only if they served his goals. Elena was invisible in his eyes, a tool, a shadow, a pair of hands holding a mop. That was all. It was a Friday afternoon when the news came. A delegation of German diplomats would be visiting the Mirabella for an exclusive private dinner. The event had been planned for months, and Richard saw it as the perfect opportunity to expand his empire into Europe. "This is our night," he told his management team, his voice sharp and commanding. "We'll show them that the Mirabella isn't just a restaurant, it's an experience, a statement of class and perfection." Everyone nodded obediently. Everyone except Elena, who of course wasn't invited to the meeting. She was outside polishing the doorknobs, pretending not to listen. But she heard everything. She always did. That night, as the diplomats arrived, the Mirabella transformed into a stage of elegance. Cameras flashed, reporters gathered outside, and waiters lined up like soldiers in a parade. Richard greeted the guests with his practiced smile, confident, charming, rehearsed. "Welcome, welcome to the Mirabella," he said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to have you here." The diplomats smiled politely. They were tall, serious men in dark suits, their wives dressed in satin gowns. The air was heavy with perfume and power. Everything seemed perfect until the conversation began. The German diplomats spoke, their words flowing effortlessly in their native tongue. Richard froze. He smiled awkwardly, nodded when he didn't understand, and tried to laugh at the wrong moments. He had expected his assistant to translate, but she had fallen ill that evening, and no one else in the restaurant spoke German. The tension in the air grew thicker by the second. The diplomats exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Richard's confident smile started to fade. His palms grew sweaty. From the kitchen door, Elena watched. She had paused for just a second, leaning on her mop, her heart pounding as she listened to the sound of the German language echoing through the restaurant. She hadn't heard it in years, not since her late husband, a German professor, had passed away. For a long time, she had buried that part of her life deep inside. It was a language that carried memories too heavy to bear. But now, standing there in her old uniform, seeing the man who had humiliated her so many times struggling to maintain his pride, something inside her stirred. She didn't plan to act. She didn't want attention. But fate has a strange way of pushing the humble into the spotlight when the proud start to stumble. Richard laughed nervously again. "Ah, yes, of course," he said, pretending to understand the diplomat's question. But the diplomat frowned. He repeated himself slower, expecting an answer. Richard's face turned pale. The other guests began to whisper. The atmosphere that had once been glowing with elegance was now coated in embarrassment. Then a voice, calm, steady, and fluent, cut through the silence. Fragte, ob Sie jemals in Deutschland waren, Herr Halloway. He asked if you've ever been to Germany, Mr. Halloway. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Elena stood near the entrance, holding her mop, her eyes lowered, but her posture firm. Her German sounded natural, confident, like music to the Diplomats' ears. One of the German guests looked astonished. Sie sprechen Deutsch? He asked with a wide smile. Elena nodded softly. Ja, fließend, she replied. Ich habe viele Jahre in Berlin gelebt. Yes, fluently. I lived in Berlin for many years. The diplomats immediately stood up, delighted. They began speaking with her enthusiastically, asking questions, laughing, as if she were an honored guest rather than the woman who cleaned their tables. The entire restaurant watched in disbelief. And Richard felt his world collapse. He stood there frozen, his face caught between shock and shame. This was the woman he had mocked, the one he had once told to stay out of sight when important people come. Now she was the only one saving his reputation. Elena's words flowed effortlessly, translating jokes, bridging the gap between cultures, and turning an awkward evening into a success. The diplomats, once uncomfortable, now smiled warmly. They even asked to take a photo with her. For the first time that night, applause filled the Mirabella, not for Richard, not for the chefs, not for the luxury, but for the cleaning lady no one had ever noticed. And as the cameras clicked and laughter filled the hall, Richard lowered his head. In that moment, for the first time in his life, he understood what humility felt like. When the event finally ended, the diplomats left with smiles and gratitude, promising to return, not because of the millionaire's charm, but because of the grace of one humble woman. Elena quietly picked up her mop again, ready to finish her work, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Richard approached her, his voice trembling. "Elena, I had no idea," he stammered. "Why didn't you ever say you spoke German?" She looked at him calmly and said, "Because, sir, you never asked." That single sentence hit harder than any lecture, harder than any humiliation he had ever given. It was the truth, simple, sharp, and unshakable. That night, long after everyone had left, Richard sat alone in his office. The echo of her words lingered in his mind. He looked around at the symbols of his success, the awards, the contracts, the fine wine, and for the first time, they felt empty. Somewhere in the silence of that luxurious restaurant, a lesson had been served that no fortune could buy. The city skyline glimmered in the late afternoon sun, casting a warm golden hue over the streets, reflecting off the glass facades of towering skyscrapers. Among them, the Mirabella restaurant stood as a monument to luxury and refinement. Its name alone was whispered in social circles like a secret password, the place where the wealthy dined, deals were made, and reputations were forged. Inside, the atmosphere was pristine, almost unreal. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, refracting light into intricate patterns on the marble floors. Tables were arranged with the precision of a military formation, each set with fine china, polished silverware, and perfectly folded napkins. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with imported flowers and roasted truffle butter, a fragrance that promised sophistication and indulgence in equal measure. And yet, amidst all the elegance, there was one person no one noticed. Elena Moreira moved quietly along the edge of the hall, a mop in her hands, her movements deliberate and practiced. She was 45, her uniform faded but neat, and her shoes worn from years of hard work. Her hair was tied back in a tight bun, though a few rebellious strands had escaped and brushed her forehead. Her hands were rough, her back slightly bent, but her eyes, Her eyes held a quiet intelligence and a calm determination that no one in the Mirabella ever took the time to see. She had been working here for over a decade, arriving early in the mornings and leaving long after the last guest had departed. She polished the floors until they reflected the chandeliers. She scrubbed the baseboards until every speck of dust disappeared, and she cleaned the mirrors until she herself seemed invisible in them. Elena's life had become a series of silent routines, unnoticed gestures and unseen labor. To the staff, she was a ghost. To the customers, she was invisible. And to Richard Halloway, the millionaire owner of the Mirabella chain, she was nothing more than a tool, a pair of hands, a uniform, and a mop. Richard Halloway was a man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself like royalty, every movement calculated to project power and superiority. His smile was charming, but it rarely reached his eyes. In his world, people were either useful or disposable. Elena, in his eyes, had always been the latter. "Stay out of the way when the important guests come," he had once said to her, his voice sharp and dismissive. "You wouldn't want to ruin the image of the restaurant with whatever it is you do." Elena had smiled politely, nodded, and returned to her work. Over the years, she had learned that keeping her head down was the safest path, and yet, even as she moved quietly, she observed everything. She noticed the fleeting glances of staff members, the whispered conversations of waiters, the subtle gestures of the chefs. She absorbed it all silently, like a shadow quietly recording the theater of human behavior around her. On this particular Friday, the air in the Mirabella was charged with anticipation. A delegation of German diplomats was scheduled to arrive for a private dinner, an event that had been meticulously planned for months. This was not just a business dinner, it was a statement. Richard wanted to impress, to assert dominance in a world where wealth and influence were currency. "This is our night," he told his managers in the private lounge, his voice confident, sharp, and commanding. "We will show them that the Mirabella isn't just a restaurant. It's a statement of class, sophistication, and control. Every detail must be perfect. No mistakes, no excuses." The managers nodded, scribbling notes, their expressions a mixture of admiration and fear. Richard had the ability to inspire, but his presence also carried a weight that made mistakes seem catastrophic. Elena, of course, was not part of this conversation. She was outside the lounge, polishing doorknobs in silence, yet she heard every word. She always did. For Elena, moments like this were both ordinary and extraordinary. She had spent years working in the background, watching the theater of the rich and powerful unfold without ever participating in it. She had learned to recognize tension, ambition, and the subtle signals of dominance. And she had learned that no one, not even a millionaire, was invincible when faced with the right knowledge, skill, or timing. As the hour of the dinner approached, the restaurant transformed. The waiters moved with precision, the tables were arranged flawlessly, and the chefs prepared their dishes with meticulous care. The chandeliers reflected 1,000 points of light onto the polished floors, creating the illusion of stars within the hall. Then the German delegation arrived. Tall, serious, impeccably dressed, the diplomats stepped into the Mirabella with an air of reserved authority. Their wives, adorned in silk gowns and diamonds, followed gracefully, observing every detail. The air was filled with the scent of perfume and anticipation. Richard greeted them with his signature charm, extending his hand in perfect posture. "Welcome, welcome to the Mirabella," he said. "It's an honor to host you tonight." Polite smiles returned the greeting. The diplomats spoke in their native German, their words flowing smoothly, full of subtle nuances and cultural cues. Richard's confident expression faltered slightly. He smiled and nodded when he didn't understand, trying to mask his confusion with charm, but the diplomat's eyes betrayed their slight frustration. He had expected his assistant to translate, but she had called in sick at the last minute. No one else in the restaurant spoke German, and suddenly the perfect dinner teetered on the edge of disaster. Elena paused, leaning on her mop as she listened. Her heart began to beat faster. Years ago, she had lived in Berlin with her late husband, a professor of German literature. She had spoken the language fluently, and for years she had tucked that part of her life away, hidden, under the weight of loss and necessity. But now, hearing the language echo through the luxurious hall, she felt something awaken inside her, a mixture of memories, pride, and quiet defiance. Richard stumbled through his response again. "Ah, yes, ja, of course," he said, his voice rising slightly in nervousness. The diplomats exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Tension thickened the air, and all eyes were now subtly turning toward the edges of the room. Then it happened. Elena's. A voice cut through the silence, calm, precise, fluent. Fragte, ob Sie jemals in Deutschland waren, Herr Halloway, she said. The room froze. Every eye turned toward her. The voice was soft, yet confident, each word pronounced perfectly, with a tone that betrayed no hesitation. One diplomat's eyebrows rose. "Sie sprechen Deutsch?" he asked, clearly surprised. Elena nodded, her expression serene. "Ja, fließend. Ich habe viele Jahre in Berlin gelebt." For the first time that evening, the atmosphere changed. The diplomats leaned in, smiles appearing on their faces. They began speaking to her, laughing, joking. Suddenly, the room was alive, energized, and vibrant. Elena, the woman no one had noticed, had become the hero of the evening. Richard, meanwhile, felt a cold shock run down his spine. The woman he had overlooked, humiliated, and dismissed for years, had just rescued him, and in front of the people he most wanted to impress. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Words failing him. Elena's composure, intelligence, and skill had upended the balance of his carefully controlled world. The night wore on, and the soft glow of chandeliers in the Mirabella cast a warm, golden light over the polished marble floors. Guests laughed, wine glasses clinked, and the aroma of exquisite cuisine lingered in the air. Yet beneath the surface of opulence, tension still simmered. Richard Halloway sat in his private office for a few minutes, staring blankly at the wall. The sounds of the dinner floated in faintly, polite conversation, distant laughter, the occasional pop of cork. He could not stop replaying Elena's words in his mind. "Yes, fluently, I lived in Berlin for many years." He had known Elena for over a decade, had seen her every day, had dismissed her, mocked her, ignored her, and yet tonight she had outshone him in front of some of the most important diplomats he had ever tried to impress. His pride, meticulously built over years of wealth, education, and influence, felt fragile and exposed. Richard's office was a shrine to his achievements. Expensive paintings lined the walls, awards gleamed on shelves, contracts were stacked neatly on a desk of dark, polished oak. But now, every symbol of his success seemed hollow. The only reality that mattered was the woman he had overlooked, the cleaning lady, who had just reminded him that his wealth could not buy skill, intelligence, or respect. Meanwhile, Elena returned to her work quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Her mop moved across the marble in steady, deliberate strokes, but inside, her mind was alive with thoughts, memories, and reflections. She remembered her years in Berlin, the streets lined with cobblestones, the language flowing effortlessly from her lips, the afternoons spent in quiet cafes with her husband discussing poetry and philosophy. That life had been full of love, knowledge, and passion, a life she had left behind when circumstances forced her into a humble existence far from her dreams. And yet tonight, in this grand hall of glass and gold, she had reclaimed a fragment of it, not for herself, not for recognition, but because it was needed, because the world demanded competence and courage, and she had both, even in silence. Her eyes met Richard's briefly across the room. He looked different, smaller somehow, humbled by the realization that his carefully curated world could not function without the skills and intelligence of someone he had ignored. After the diplomats had departed, Richard requested a private meeting with Elena. The staff exchanged nervous glances. No one had ever seen the millionaire personally summon a cleaning lady to his office. Elena entered, her posture calm, hands folded in front of her. She had expected some form of reprimand, perhaps sarcasm, perhaps condescension, but what she found was something far more unexpected. Richard rose from behind his desk, a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and curiosity in his eyes. "Elena, I had no idea," he began, his voice unsteady. "Why didn't you ever tell me you spoke German?" Elena looked at him, expression serene. "Because, sir, you never asked." The words hit him harder than any insult or confrontation could have. In a single sentence, she had distilled years of neglect, dismissal, and assumptions into a quiet truth he could not ignore. Richard rubbed his face with his hands, taking a deep breath. For the first time, he considered the possibility that his perception of people, his judgment based on status, position, or uniform, had been fundamentally flawed. "You saved the evening," he finally admitted. "You handled everything I couldn't, and you did it effortlessly." Elena simply nodded. "I only did what needed to be done, sir." It was a moment of awakening for Richard. For the first time, he recognized the value of humility, respect, and genuine talent, unconnected to wealth or title. He understood, in a way he never had before, that the real strength of a person was not measured by their job, their attire, or their social standing, but by courage, skill, and integrity. Over the next few days, Elena's presence at the Mirabella subtly shifted. The staff, who had always treated her as invisible, began to observe her differently. Waiters sought her opinion, chefs asked for advice, and even the managers treated her with a level of respect previously unseen. Richard, meanwhile, struggled with his own ego. He walked through the restaurant, seeing Elena at work, noticing the efficiency, the grace, the intelligence she exhibited even in simple tasks. Every interaction reminded him that he had underestimated her, and that his previous arrogance had blinded him to the people around him. One afternoon, Richard called Elena into his office. "Elena," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about the dinner and about you. I need to make amends in a way. I want to offer you a position, a role where your skills and intelligence can be used to their full potential. You've earned it." Elena raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "A position, sir?" "Yes," Richard said, leaning forward. "I want you to work directly with me. You will assist in communications, translation, and management when we deal with international clients. Your talents are too valuable to remain hidden. I was wrong to overlook you all these years." Elena paused, thinking carefully. Accepting this position would elevate her. Status, bring responsibility, and even more visibility. But it also carried risks, navigating a world that had long dismissed her, dealing with the pride of a man who had humiliated her. Yet she saw sincerity in his eyes, a humility she had never witnessed before. "I accept," she said quietly, "on the condition that my work speaks for itself, not for appearances, not for praise." Richard nodded, feeling a mix of relief and respect. "Agreed. Your work will speak for itself." In the weeks that followed, Elena flourished in her new role. She managed communications with foreign clients, translated important documents, and even trained staff in etiquette and protocol for high-profile events. Her fluency in German became an asset the restaurant could no longer function without. The Mirabella's reputation soared. Diplomats returned, celebrities dined with new confidence, and Richard finally began to understand the true meaning of leadership, recognizing, respecting, and empowering those around you, regardless of status or title. And Elena, she remained humble, kind, and grounded, carrying herself with the same quiet dignity she always had. Her triumph was not just in professional success, but in proving that value and talent are often hidden in plain sight. Richard, who had once seen her as invisible, now saw her as indispensable, not just to his business, but as a constant reminder that humility, respect, and recognition of others are far more powerful than wealth or status. Alone, the cleaning lady, who no one noticed, had not only saved the evening but had transformed a man, a business, and a world of assumptions. Quietly, without arrogance, simply by being herself. The early morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Mirabella, casting long stripes of golden light across the marble floors. Elena arrived before anyone else, as usual, her mop in hand, her steps silent but purposeful. Yet today, there was a subtle shift in the air, a new tension, a quiet anticipation. She had accepted her new role alongside Richard, and though she moved with the same humble grace, her mind was alive with memories she had not visited in years. Berlin. The sound of the language, once a comfort, now stirred emotions both bitter and sweet. She remembered the narrow streets lined with cobblestones, the smell of fresh bread from the bakeries on every corner, the distant ringing of church bells on Sunday mornings. She remembered her husband, Johann, a man of intelligence and quiet charm, who had taught her that language could be a bridge between worlds. She had been young then, full of hope, ambition, and love. Life had seemed endless, possibilities infinite, and then tragedy had struck. Johann had passed suddenly, leaving her alone in a city that once felt like home, but now only echoed with memories. She had returned to Brazil, to a life of humble work and anonymity, burying the European part of herself beneath layers of survival. And yet, tonight, with the German diplomats praising her skill, she realized that past was never truly gone. It had been waiting, patient, for the right moment to emerge. Richard Halloway, meanwhile, was pacing in his office. The events of the last dinner had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He had built his empire on certainty, on control, and yet he had been powerless in the face of Elena's unexpected competence. He thought about her daily, about the calm authority in her voice, the way she moved through the restaurant with quiet confidence, how she had handled the diplomats with ease while he had stumbled. He had spent years believing that wealth and status were the ultimate tools of power, only to be reminded that true power often lay in intelligence, courage, and the humility to act when needed. He had never considered that someone so low in his hierarchy could teach him a lesson he could not learn in a boardroom or conference. One afternoon, Richard called Elena into his office once. Again, she entered quietly, expecting instructions or perhaps advice, but what she found was unexpected. A man wrestling with his own ego, a man attempting to understand the lessons he had been too blind to see. "Elena," he began, voice careful, I've been thinking a lot about last week. About the dinner, about you." He paused, searching for words. "I realized something important. I need to understand more about who you are, not just your skills, but your story. How did you learn to speak German so fluently?" Elena hesitated for only a moment. Sharing her past was not something she did lightly, but there was trust here, fragile, yet growing. She began to recount the story of her life in Germany, of the love she had shared with Johann, of the sudden loss that had changed her world, and of the strength it had taken to start anew in a country far from home. Richard listened, captivated. Every detail painted a picture of resilience, intelligence, and grace, qualities he had overlooked for years. For the first time, he saw her as a full person, not just an employee, not just a cleaning lady, but a human being with depth, history, and undeniable value. Over the next weeks, Richard began involving Elena more in the restaurant's international operations. She translated documents, liaised with foreign clients, and advised on cultural nuances. But beyond her technical skills, it was her wisdom, empathy, and ability to navigate human emotions that transformed the workplace. Staff who had once ignored her now sought her guidance. Even the waiters and chefs looked to her as a figure of calm authority. Richard's transformation was subtle but undeniable. He found himself questioning his assumptions about people, realizing that his pride and status had blinded him to the talents and humanity around him. He began to mentor staff differently, encouraging input from every level and making decisions with more humility and consideration. Meanwhile, Elena faced her own internal challenges. She was no longer invisible, and the attention was both gratifying and intimidating. She had always worked in the shadows, comfortable in anonymity. Now she was at the center of operations, her abilities recognized and relied upon. It required a new kind of courage to assert herself, to navigate office politics, and to maintain her humility despite admiration and respect. One evening, as the restaurant emptied and the last of the dishes were cleared, Richard approached her. "Elena, I've been thinking about how much you've changed everything here, not just the restaurant, but me. I want to make sure you know how much I respect you, truly." Elena looked at him, her expression calm but firm. "Thank you, sir. Respect is earned, not given." Richard smiled, feeling a rare sense of humility wash over him. He had learned, slowly but surely, that leadership was not about dominance, wealth, or control. It was about recognizing talent, empowering others, and embracing humility. The next big challenge arrived unexpectedly. A high-profile gala was scheduled, attended by international dignitaries, celebrities, and media. This was an event that could make or break the restaurant's reputation. Richard was confident, but for the first time, he realized the stakes were higher than he had imagined. Elena, as usual, worked behind the scenes, coordinating staff, ensuring every detail was perfect. She spoke with clients in multiple languages, smoothing over misunderstandings and preventing potential disasters. Her presence was invisible to the casual observer, but indispensable to the event's success. When the gala concluded flawlessly, Richard stood back and observed Elena quietly. She moved through the hall, her uniform simple, her demeanor serene, yet she radiated authority, competence, and quiet power. He knew that without her, the night would have been chaos. He had once underestimated her. He had once believed that status, wealth, and titles were everything. And now he understood the truth. True value often comes from those we least expect, and humility can outshine any fortune. Weeks had passed since Elena's rise from invisibility to indispensable figure at the Mirabella. The once static rhythms of the restaurant now pulsed with energy, driven by her quiet authority and impeccable foresight. Richard Halloway, the millionaire who had long defined himself by wealth and dominance, found his days increasingly consumed by admiration and a growing sense of humility. He watched Elena move through the restaurant with a mixture of awe and unease. She was no longer just a cleaning lady. She was the lifeblood of the establishment, the invisible hand orchestrating every success. The gala had been a turning point, but it was merely the precursor to what was about to unfold. A new delegation, this one even more prestigious, a coalition of European investors considering major partnerships, had scheduled a visit. The stakes were higher than ever. Richard's empire could grow exponentially with their backing, but any misstep could jeopardize everything. He had assembled his team meticulously. Every detail had been considered: the table settings, the floral arrangements, the menu crafted to perfection. But a lingering worry gnawed at him. The delegation would speak multiple languages, including German, French, and Italian. And his staff, though competent, was woefully unprepared for such linguistic demands. Richard sighed and leaned against his office doorframe, staring out at the polished floors below. His gaze fell on Elena, who was arranging silverware with calm precision, her movements both deliberate and graceful. Her presence filled the room, commanding attention without demanding it, and yet she moved as if invisible, a ghost of competence and elegance. "Elena," he called, his voice betraying a hint of unease, "I need you to prepare for this delegation. They'll be asking questions in multiple languages, and I don't know if we're ready." Elena looked up, her calm expression unwavering. "Sir, I can handle it. I have experience with multiple languages, and I know how to navigate high-profile interactions. I will ensure nothing goes wrong." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "I trust you." Trust. The word felt strange on his tongue. He had spent decades relying on power, money, and control. Now he realized that trust, in someone like Elena, someone he had once dismissed, was more valuable than any financial advantage he had ever possessed. The day of the delegation arrived, and the Mirabella was transformed into a palace of elegance and refinement. The guests entered with air of expectation, their expressions formal, their movements measured. They spoke in German, French, and Italian, their words flowing effortlessly. Richard tried to greet them with charm, but he could already feel the tension creeping in. Misunderstandings were inevitable, and then Elena stepped forward. Calm, poised, and radiant in her simple uniform, she began to speak. Her German was flawless, her French precise, her Italian elegant. The guests laughed, smiled, and engaged with her, completely at ease. She translated seamlessly, interpreted subtle cultural cues, and even anticipated questions before they were asked. Richard watched from the side, his chest tight with both pride and disbelief. Elena, the woman he had humiliated, ignored, and underestimated, was commanding the room. She had transformed the potential disaster into a triumph, and she did it with effortless grace. The delegation was impressed. Their admiration for Elena was palpable. They complimented her professionalism, her intelligence, and her demeanor. One diplomat, an elderly gentleman with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned toward Richard and said, "Sir, your staff is remarkable, particularly the young lady who speaks German and French so fluently. She handles everything with precision and elegance." Richard felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the rush of emotion. "She is extraordinary." After the delegation departed, Elena returned to her work quietly, as she always did. But this time, Richard approached her directly. He had made a decision, one that would alter both their lives forever. "Elena," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I want to offer you a permanent leadership role, not just as my assistant, but as the head of international relations for the Mirabella. You have shown intelligence, skill, and grace that surpasses anything I have ever witnessed. You deserve this." Elena blinked, processing the offer. She had risen through patience, skill, and quiet determination, never seeking recognition, never demanding reward. And now, finally, she was being acknowledged for her true worth. "I accept," she said simply, her voice calm but resolute, "on one condition, that my work is judged by results, not appearances, not favoritism." Richard nodded. "Agreed. Your work will always speak for itself." The weeks that followed were transformative. Elena implemented new systems, trained staff, and developed strategies for handling international clients. Her ability to anticipate problems before they arose, her calm in the face of chaos, and her deep understanding of human behavior elevated the Mirabella to new heights. Richard, meanwhile, underwent a subtle but profound transformation. He learned to listen, to value others, and to recognize that leadership was not about dominance, but about empowerment. He saw firsthand the consequences of underestimating people based on appearances, and he vowed never to repeat the mistake. One evening, as the restaurant quieted after another successful event, Richard stood watching Elena move through the hall, her uniform simple, her presence commanding without effort. He realized that the Mirabella's greatest asset was not its chandeliers, its marble floors, or its lavish menu. It was Elena. She had not only saved his business, but had taught him the most valuable lesson of all. Never underestimate someone, for true strength and brilliance often reside where you least expect it. And so, Elena's journey continued. From an invisible cleaning lady to a respected leader, her story became a legend within the Mirabella. Staff and guests alike marveled at her intelligence, grace, and humility. Richard, once a man defined by wealth and arrogance, had learned that the true measure of a person was not money or status, but courage, integrity, and the ability to lift others up. The turning point had come, and with it, a transformation that would affect not just the restaurant, but everyone who crossed Elena's path. The sun rose slowly over the city, painting the Mirabella in soft amber light. Elena arrived early, as always, her steps measured, her mind alert. But today, there was a distinct electricity in the air, the culmination of weeks of preparation, effort, and subtle transformation. Today was not just another day at the restaurant, it was a day of reckoning, a day that would define not only Elena's place within the Mirabella, but also the legacy of Richard Halloway's empire. Inside, the staff moved with heightened precision. Waiters whispered to each other in hushed tones, chefs checked ingredients multiple times, and managers walked the floor nervously. All knew that the Mirabella would host a delegation unlike any before, a consortium of global investors, dignitaries, and media representatives, each one a potential game-changer for the restaurant and its owner. Richard Halloway stood in his private office, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. He watched Elena move through the dining hall, her presence commanding without overt display. She coordinated staff, inspected table arrangements, and checked the translations of menus and speeches in multiple languages. There was a quiet confidence in her movements that made even Richard stop in awe. She had transformed not only the workflow, but the very atmosphere of the restaurant, infusing it with a sense of calm authority. "Sir," Elena said, approaching him briefly, "everything is ready. The guests will arrive in 15 minutes. I've double-checked the translations, coordinated the seating, and ensured the staff is prepared for any contingencies." Richard exhaled, a mix of relief and admiration washing over him. "Elena, I don't know what I would do without you." She smiled faintly, a hint of humility in her expression. "You don't have to, sir. That's why I'm here, to ensure the Mirabella shines as it should." The delegation arrived precisely on schedule. Cars pulled up to the grand entrance, and the guests stepped onto the red carpet with an air of anticipation and scrutiny. Elena greeted them discreetly, her multilingual skills immediately putting everyone at ease. She translated conversations seamlessly, anticipating questions before they were even asked, and diffused misunderstandings with a grace that left everyone impressed. Richard, meanwhile, followed quietly from behind, observing the way Elena managed the room. He had once assumed that charm, wealth, and status could navigate any situation. Now he understood a deeper truth. Competence, intelligence, and emotional acuity often mattered far more than any title or fortune. By the time the dinner commenced, the guests were relaxed, laughing, and engaging with each other. Effortlessly, Elena moved through the room like a conductor, orchestrating interactions, ensuring every detail was perfect. She suggested wine pairings, translated casual conversations into culturally appropriate responses, and even anticipated the exact timing of speeches and announcements. One of the investors, a sharp-eyed woman from Germany, leaned toward Richard and whispered, "Your assistant. She's extraordinary. I've never seen such precision and elegance. You are fortunate to have her." Richard felt a mix of pride and humility. "Yes," he said quietly, "she is remarkable." As the night progressed, Elena's influence became undeniable. She had not only prevented potential disasters, but had enhanced every aspect of the event, making it unforgettable. Richard observed quietly, realizing that every decision he had made without considering her input had been flawed. She had saved not only the evening, but his reputation. After the guests departed, the staff erupted in whispered admiration. Elena had once been invisible, a mere shadow in the grandeur of the Mirabella. Now she was the focal point of success, respected and admired by everyone in the room. Richard called her into his office once more. "Elena," he began, voice heavy with emotion, "I don't know if words can ever truly express my gratitude. You've done more than I could have imagined. You've transformed this restaurant, my perception of people, and even me." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, sir. But my work is not for praise. It is for results, and today we achieved them together." Richard nodded slowly. "No, Elena, today you achieved them, and I was fortunate enough to witness it. I want you to know you are indispensable, not just for the Mirabella, but for everything we aspire to accomplish." The following weeks were transformative. Elena's role expanded beyond expectations. She managed international correspondence, trained staff in etiquette and diplomacy, and became Richard's trusted advisor. Her insight and intelligence had become a cornerstone of the Mirabella's operations. The restaurant's reputation soared, attracting global attention, while Richard himself began to change in ways subtle yet profound. He listened more, valued his team, and acknowledged the talents of those he had once dismissed. The staff, too, were inspired. The once hierarchical, rigid atmosphere of the Mirabella evolved into one of collaboration, respect, and empowerment. Elena's journey from invisible cleaning lady to revered leader became a lesson for everyone. Talent and value are not determined by uniform, title, or social status. They are found in skill, character, and integrity. One evening, Richard watched Elena coordinate a team of waiters for a high-profile VIP dinner. Her calm authority, intelligence, and grace were mesmerizing. He realized that the Mirabella's true jewel was not its chandeliers, marble floors, or luxury dishes. It was Elena. She had transformed the entire operation, and in doing so, had transformed him as well. The Mirabella glimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, every corner radiating elegance, every table immaculately set. Tonight was not just another evening. It was the culmination of years of meticulous preparation, silent determination, and the delicate intertwining of past struggles and present triumphs. The city's elite had gathered for a gala that would determine not only the future of Richard Halloway's empire, but the lasting legacy of Elena, the woman who had once been invisible. Elena arrived earlier than anyone else, as always. Her uniform, simple yet impeccable, belied the quiet authority that had transformed the Mirabella into more than a restaurant, a symbol of excellence, resilience, and unseen brilliance. She moved through the hallways, checking the lighting, confirming staff readiness, and ensuring every detail aligned with her vision. Her calm composure belied the storm of anticipation inside her. The stakes were higher than ever, and the entire world seemed poised to notice the extraordinary. Richard Halloway watched her from his office balcony. For the first time in years, he felt a vulnerability he had never known. The realization that his empire's success no longer rested solely on his wealth, influence, or charm, but on Elena's skill, wisdom, and unwavering resolve. He had underestimated her once. Never again. Tonight, he whispered to himself, everyone will see what I've always known. As the guests began to arrive, the air buzzed with expectation. Diplomats, international investors, media personalities, and celebrities moved through the grand entrance, exchanging polite greetings and assessing the grandeur of the Mirabella. Elena greeted each with a graceful nod, her multilingual skills immediately easing tension and creating rapport. German, French, Italian, her command of languages was flawless, her demeanor effortlessly commanding respect. Richard stood to the side, observing. His chest tightened with a mix of pride, awe, and a lingering trace of guilt. He remembered every insult, every dismissal, every day he had failed to see Elena's true worth. And now he watched her command the attention, admiration, and respect that he had long believed were reserved for wealth and status alone. A diplomat from Germany leaned in, speaking in precise German, and Elena responded fluidly, her words carrying authority and grace. Laughter, understanding, and ease flowed through the conversation as if she were a conductor orchestrating harmony from chaos. Richard's eyes narrowed, absorbing every detail. every smile, every impressed glance directed at her. "She's extraordinary," he whispered under his breath, unable to contain the awe in his voice. The night progressed with seamless precision. Elena guided conversations, coordinated the staff, and subtly managed every interaction to ensure the evening's success. She intervened quietly when misunderstandings arose, diffused tension with gentle authority, and anticipated questions before they were even asked. Every gesture, every decision was deliberate, measured, and brilliant. Richard, watching from the shadows, realized something profound. The power he had spent decades chasing, the wealth, influence, and status, was meaningless without insight, empathy, and competence. Elena had taught him the ultimate lesson. True greatness is measured not by possessions, but by intelligence, character, and the ability to inspire others. When the final toast was raised, all eyes turned to Elena. She had orchestrated a flawless evening, ensuring every detail, every interaction, every impression was perfect. The room erupted in applause, not for Richard, not for the opulence, but for her. She had become the heart, mind, and soul of the Mirabella, an undeniable force that commanded respect and admiration. After the gala, Richard summoned Elena to his office. The room was quiet, the soft glow of the city lights spilling through the tall windows. He stood before her, no words immediately forming, as if the magnitude of the night and the journey they had shared had left him momentarily speechless. "Elena," he began, voice steady but rich with emotion. "Tonight everyone witnessed what I've always known. You are extraordinary, not just in skill but in character, intelligence, and courage. You have transformed this place, my life, and everyone who has had the privilege to witness it." Elena met his gaze, calm and composed, yet there was a quiet intensity in her eyes. "Thank you, sir, but my work is never for recognition. It is for results, for excellence, and for the people we serve." Richard stepped closer, a rare vulnerability in his posture. "And yet tonight the world saw what I've seen every day. You've earned respect, admiration, and influence far beyond what I could have ever imagined. I am grateful, endlessly grateful, that I finally understand the truth." Her lips curved into a faint, serene smile. "The truth, sir, is that no one should be underestimated. Every person has potential, wisdom, and strength, sometimes hidden, sometimes silent, waiting for the right moment to emerge." In the days that followed, the story of Elena's triumph spread beyond the Mirabella. Articles, interviews, and social media posts praised her skill, humility, and intelligence. She became a symbol of perseverance, an inspiration to anyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. Her leadership transformed the Mirabella's culture, inspiring staff to strive for excellence while remaining grounded, humble, and collaborative. Richard's transformation was equally remarkable. No longer a man defined by wealth and ego, he now valued insight, integrity, and empathy above all else. He had learned firsthand the consequences of arrogance, the folly of dismissing talent, and the transformative power of recognizing the worth of others. Together, Elena and Richard became a formidable team. She led with intelligence, grace, and quiet authority, while he supported with resources, trust, and a newfound humility. The Mirabella thrived not merely as a restaurant, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when respect, recognition, and opportunity were extended to those who deserved it most. Yet even as accolades poured in and the Mirabella's fame soared, Elena remained grounded. She continued her work with humility, mentoring staff, anticipating challenges, and ensuring the restaurant's operations reflected excellence at every level. Her personal journey, from invisibility to recognition, from silence to authority, had not only reshaped her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. Richard watched her often, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. Pride, wealth, and status could never replace wisdom, skill, or character. The ultimate lesson had been delivered, in the form of a woman who had risen quietly, endured hardship, and emerged with brilliance and humility intact. And yet, despite the triumphs, the recognition, and the transformation, a quiet tension lingered. The story was almost complete, but there remained one final revelation, one last challenge that would fully test Elena's brilliance, courage, and leadership and determine the lasting legacy of her journey.